Hi, I'm Melissa Trudinger and I'm one of the writers from the APA's In Motion magazine. I'm here with APA titled Sports and Exercise Physiotherapist Victoria Kahn from Australian Athletics at the Australian Sports Commission and Australian Institute of Sport Women in Sport Congress. Victoria, can you tell me a little bit about about yourself and why you're here?
Thanks for having me today. I'm Vic Kahn. I'm a titled APA Sport and Exercise Physiotherapist. I also work as the Performance Support Manager at Australian Athletics, so I oversee the development and implementation of sports science and medicine across our Olympic and Paralympic disciplines. I've been really lucky to be able to present some work that we've done around supporting our athletes in the perinatal space at the Women in Sport Congress.
Well, what are the barriers that are facing athlete mothers and pregnant athletes through pregnancy and return to sport?
We've really looked into the concept of what are the barriers, what are the enablers of supporting pregnant women in our sport and their return to sport postpartum. And what we found, there were 5 major barriers for pregnant athletes and athletes returning to sport postpartum. The first one was financial and organisational support. So we've actually embedded within our policy a financial support system that holds their categorisation so they don't lose funding in the time that they take off during pregnancy and in the postpartum period. The second barrier was the pelvic floor. We have athletes across throwing sports, running sports, jumping sports, who all have very different sporting needs. Tailoring pelvic floor planning through pregnancy, through childbirth, and then through postpartum is critical from that individual perspective to allow them to return to their specific sport. Barrier 3 was the actual returning to running, jumping, throwing. And what we know is that the general population guidelines aren't necessarily translatable to the elite sporting population, especially when the vastly different demands of our sports mean that we need a tailored and individualised approach. So we've ensured that we're upskilling our practitioners, we're enabling coach, athlete and performance support team discussions to make sure that we're developing criteria-based progressions that are individualised for the athlete and their sport. The fourth barrier we found was around the nutrition, physiological and breastfeeding space. We know that athletes require different optimal levels of energy availability, iron, compared with the general population. And so we are working with sports dietitians who are educated and upskilled in the area of the perinatal space to ensure that early engagement with these people means that we're getting tailored, individualised athlete approaches. We're also working with athletes and families to work out what's best for them, whether it's the case of facilitating access at an Airbnb outside the Olympic Village so that an athlete can go and breastfeed before their event, whether it's engaging with the IOC regarding breastfeeding and family areas at an Olympic Games or a Paralympic Games. We know that a happier athlete is going to perform best, so if we can work with them to remove some of those stresses, then hopefully it benefits everyone on the team as well. The final barrier that we identified was in the mental health, well-being and the space that I like to call matriescence, which is that transition to motherhood, which is multifactorial. So we don't initiate conversations with our athletes postpartum for 6 months regarding return to sport. They're welcome to initiate them with us, but they can still access their funding and discussions around critical support servicing. But in giving them that 6-month period to navigate the transition to motherhood and just be mum, then they can really work on their return to sport goals if that's what they choose to do.
What needs to be considered for these elite athletes? What are the most important things, I guess?
I think the most important considerations are knowing that they're all very different individuals. So if we don't adopt an individualised approach, it's not a one-size-fits-all scenario. So we're not necessarily going to return them to health or performance goals if we don't address those individualised needs, whether that's in the nutritional space. A marathon runner, for example, requires very different nutritional profile to a javelin thrower. Whether that's in the pelvic floor space, a marathon runner compared with a long jumper, a speed power athlete. And then we move to look at what our Paralympic space looks like as well, in terms of making sure we're thinking about prosthetic care and stump care you know, in pregnancy and postpartum, where you might have changes to the stump itself.
What has Australian Athletics implemented then to support their athletes through pregnancy and postpartum so that they can return to sport successfully?
Since 2020, we've had 12 Australian athlete mums who've been able to return to sport postpartum and represent Australia at either Olympic, Paralympic or World Championship level. Our model is integrated, it's empowering. People are able to navigate their way through by accessing information, education. They're involved in informed decision making. We set milestones that are criteria based, not time based, so that they can meet their milestone before they progress to the next level. And we allow them to have that individualised approach.
Victoria, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to chat with me about your research.
Thanks for having me.